Sometimes 5 Fact Friday needs to be done from the road, as is the case this week. And sorry about the background noise, this is the best I can do. Now, this is an unusual 5 Fact Friday. There are 5 facts, and the 5 facts are based on inflation, short-term fixed rate mortgages, leasehold flats, specifically the ones that have less than 100 years on them, the housing market locally versus nationally, and the facts relating to renting versus buying. And these 5 facts on this special and unusual 5 Fact Friday are facts that are not new this week. They are facts that exist at all times. They are arguably the 5 most important facts, and there hasn't been that much really newsworthy in the news this week anyway. Certainly nothing that's actually going to influence or impact the market. Lots of talk, lots of speculation, no concrete hard facts. And I suppose this 5 Fact Friday is probably going to represent a slight change of direction with the content of my videos, where I'm going to be focusing more on helping actual movers and less time chattering about everyone's mixed opinions. It doesn't actually help anything very much. The thing that's most rewarding for me is the messages I get every day telling me, I've just got into my dream home, it was thanks to this channel. I've just avoided a massive nightmare, it was thanks to this channel. And I want to double down on that. So that's why today's 5 Fact Friday is 5 of the things that I think are the most important considerations for anyone considering buying or selling and buying, so buying or moving, at any point in any market, whether the market's going up, going down, or sideways. My goal is that these 5 facts are, I'm going to call them the evergreen 5 facts that buyers, and especially first-time buyers, but all buyers, need to be aware of when it comes to moving house in the UK. No particular order. Fact number 1. Inflation is an important factor in the long-term effect of your purchase decision, and inflation has 2 impacts. Number 1, inflation reduces the value of your home, not the price, but the value of your home, okay? And number 2, the same inflation also reduces the value, not the price, but the value of your debt, okay? So inflation is a 2-edged sword, but because most of the time the value of your debt will be less, in other words, the value of your mortgage that you've taken out to buy your house will be less than the value that you've paid for the house, the price you paid for the house, right? The amount of the mortgage is going to be less than the price you paid for the house, almost always, unless you're getting a more than 100% mortgage. Don't do that. And so that is the reason why in 2024, when I'm recording this video, the value of houses is the same as it was back in 2003. Okay, so the overall value of UK's housing stock is the same as it was in 2003 because of inflation. The peak of house values was 2007, and house values, not prices, not the sticker price, not the number on the price, but the value once you take inflation into account, so the real value of your home, currently are at 2003 levels. So in 21 years, there's been no actual increase in the value of houses because of what inflation has done to them. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing, it's just a factor to take into account, because also, if you bought a home with a large mortgage, the value of that mortgage has also decreased, okay? So I'm not saying it's good or bad. This also suggests, of course, that if you're buying 100% cash, then you are more exposed to inflation than if you have a mortgage on the property. It's also true. But there we are. just remember that when they say house prices double every 10 years, which may or may not be true depending on the dates you start and finish the 10 years, it's a mistake not to factor inflation into that consideration, okay? So that's fact number one. Inflation eats away at the value of your home, but also eats away at the value of your mortgage debt if you have a mortgage debt on there. Fact number two, short-term fixed-rate mortgage deals are inherently risky because they contain with them a level of uncertainty. I mean, who knows what's going to be happening in the world 2 years from now, right? Do you know? Short-term fixes are what they call in America teaser rates, and unless you have looked at the worst case scenario of taking out a short-term fix and gone, I can handle that, and I'll tell you what that is in a second. In other words, unless you've consciously considered the actual ramifications of if things go against you in your 2-year or your 5-year or even your 10-year fix, and you're like, okay, it's okay, I can handle that if the worst case happens, then good. But I would suggest that the currently 500,000 or so people who have been, most of whom will have been forced onto a standard variable rate, which is much more expensive, when they got to the end of their 2 or their 5-year fixed rate, and because interest rates have changed, can no longer afford their mortgage amount on a fixed rate, and therefore the terms of the mortgage put you straight onto the standard variable rate. I don't think many of those 500,000 borrowers considered that possibility when they took out their 2 or their 5-year fixed rate. And I think if they had, and if they thought that's going to happen, they probably wouldn't have bought. Or possibly wouldn't, who knows. Now, yes, it's true to say that there are some people who will get to the end of the fixed rate and there's only a small amount left and it's not much longer to go, so they'll just decide to leave it on standard variable rate because it doesn't make sense doing another fixed period. There are some of those, but they are in the minority. Generally speaking, a standard variable rate is the most expensive rate you can pay on your mortgage. So no one's going to choose that, are they? So 500,000 people currently, according to that article in Telegraph, have been caught out by things not going as they expected when they took out their 2-year or their 5-year fix. So just remember, the shorter term the rate, the higher the risk. Now, I'm not putting a number on that risk, I'm not putting a probability on the risk. Nevertheless, you have to consider the worst case scenario when you are taking on a major obligation, a long-term debt, a long-term commitment. Think it through, because if you don't, and then this happens, it can end up being a life-changingly bad situation, right? So that's fact number two. Short-term fixes are risky, so only take the risk if you can afford to take the risk. And if you can't afford to take the risk, the longer the term that is fixed, the more stability and security you have, even if it means a slightly higher payment, okay? It's up to your own risk appetite and, you know, the risk or possibility of a small saving versus the risk of ending up on a standard variable rate. That's fact number two. Fact number three, leaseholds. Most leaseholds were like 99-year leases. And I'm ignoring the changes where they're now getting into 999-year leases. That's a different, I'm not talking about those 1,000-year leases, okay? When you buy a 99-year lease on a property, you are buying the right to rent that property from the freeholder for 99 years. That's what it is, okay? And if you were a cash buyer of a leasehold, for example, you're handing over that money, and that money, it's got a ticking clock on it, and the clock ticks down. At the end of the 99 years, you've got nothing left, you walk away with nothing. So if you're buying a leasehold flat with 99 or fewer years on it, and you're taking out a 25 or 30-year mortgage on it, then it stands to reason that, excluding whatever changes there are in house prices, and excluding whatever changes there are in inflation, that kind of stuff, the value of what you're buying will decrease by 25 to 30% over that period of time. Ignoring service charges, ignoring ground rent, ignoring insurances, ignoring everything else, right? You're buying something for 100 years. So as the time goes down, 25 years, you've only got 75 years left on it. You've only got 75% of the value. Yes, that may get offset by rising market prices. But I think it's something that a lot of people don't consider. And you look at flat values, leasehold flat values in London, and they have not gone up, even in nominal terms, let alone real terms, since about 2016, 2018. So it took about 6 to 8 years of no market growth in leasehold flat values. So when you buy a leasehold as opposed to a freehold, there is an extra depreciation you need to factor in. Unless it's a 1,000-year lease, different kettle of fish. But I'm talking about the shorter leases, the 100-year or less leases, okay? You are buying an asset that will have an intrinsic devaluation in it based on the time left on the lease. Yes, you can extend them. Yes, there are all kinds of opportunities, but it's important, and I think a lot of leaseholders don't factor that in when they buy a leasehold property. That's fact number 3, right? Always true, that fact. Fact number 4. Every factor affecting the housing market is a local one, with only one exception. And this is really important because too many people, especially first-time buyers, get massively distracted by the national media hyperbole on the housing market. House prices rise at their fastest rate. House prices fall at their fastest rate. House prices do this or that or the other at their fastest or slowest or biggest or smallest rate. Headlines, and everyone goes, oh, what does that mean? Nationally, those national figures are of almost zero relevance to an individual property or an individual buyer. Okay? Everything to do with an actual personal purchase or sale decision, when you want to know what's happening in the market, is the market for that kind of property in that area at this time. Everything else is a distraction, wrong, irrelevant, and is easily used to talk people into going, no, it's fine, just buy this property now. Okay? Which is why I say, if you are a buyer, a serious buyer, unless you are out viewing, you don't know what's happening in the marketplace you are in, which is the market for the kind of properties you're buying. The only thing that affects it nationally is policy making. So when, for example, the government announces a Help to Buy scheme, that has national implications on house prices. Absolutely. When they're changing tax, when they change stamp duty. So any national policy making at government level is relevant to all movers, 100%. But those don't change on a week-to-week basis. They rarely change. Those are newsworthy when they change. If the government brings out another Help to Buy or equivalent, that is absolutely relevant and newsworthy to everyone in the housing market. If they make changes to stamp duty, it's the same. But otherwise, the housing market, there isn't. There's no such thing as the national housing market. There are just thousands, tens of thousands of micro markets. And when you're considering the factors affecting your move, only the things that affect your micro market matter to you, and everything else is guff. Right? So, housing markets are local, not national. Prices are local, not national. National house price indices are pointless and meaningless to a local move or an individual move. They do not make any difference whatsoever to what's happening in the market for the properties that concern you. That's number 4. And number 5 is the age-old rent versus buy. Should I rent or should I buy? Is it a good time to buy? Both of those questions, when put to someone like me, are the wrong question to be asking, because no matter what the answer is, if it's a generic answer from someone like me, talks about the market as a whole, it doesn't necessarily apply to you. Renting versus buying is, number one, a personal consideration that has a long list of other non-financial considerations in it as well. Having said that, the following things exist. The following truths exist. The following fact exists with renting versus buying. Both have pros and cons. And whether those pros and cons apply to you is down to your personal situation and the individual properties that you're looking at, okay? So the rent versus buy, or is it a good time to buy, is again, it is a hyper-personal question that cannot be answered generally. People go, oh, it's always better to buy. If you're someone who aspires to own a property, that's the first condition, right? If you're someone who aspires to own a property, and not everybody does, then of course owning a property will be better than renting because the stability suits you. Lots of other things might suit you. But there's a massive condition. It's only better to buy than rent if the property that you're buying is a good buy. If you buy a nightmare that you can't wake up from, you will dream of being renting again, which gives you flexibility and freedom and insulates you from those kind of problems, right? Some properties have absolute nightmares with them, and as the owner, you can't get out of them. Take a look at the cladding scandal. All the leasehold flat owners living in properties. I mean, these are problems that do not affect people who are renting. So it is wrong to universally say it's better to buy than rent. That is absolutely not true without applying certain conditions. If you want to own, if you aspire to own, and if you find a property that is not a depreciating, high maintenance nightmare, and if you buy a property that isn't next to neighbours from hell, and if you buy a property that doesn't crumble and fall and have non-stop problem, and this happens with new builds as well, right? If all those things on that long list are true, then yes, if you're someone who wanted to own, it is better if you can get into one of those properties at the right price and you avoid all of those nightmares. But it's a minefield. You've got structural issues, you've got warranty issues if it's a new build, you've got neighbour issues, you've got ground stability and flood risk issues, you've got environmental issues, you've got political issues, you've got, I mean, it just goes, the list goes on and on and on and on. And some properties have nightmares that just won't go away. So yes, it's better to own if you can find a property that isn't a nightmare and if you buy it well. Otherwise, renting is much safer, but again, on the condition that you have a home that you like living in and a landlord who's a reliable, decent landlord that's going to allow you to stay there as long as you want. Okay, so there are conditions on both. There are many people who've bought in the last few years now who would have been better off staying in rented. Now, if you're just going to compare a mortgage repayment with a rent payment, I'm afraid that's a massive display of a lack of knowledge and understanding about all of the factors that affect it. And it's that misnomer, is it cheaper to buy or rent, which leads most people into the trap of bad ownership experiences. Right? It's not just about how much is my rent, how much is my mortgage. You're missing out on so many other risks. So again, the answer to whether you should rent or buy and whether it's a good time to buy or not is down to your time in life, your aspirations, your life plans, your risk appetite, your uncertainty, and a whole list of other things in relation to each individual property, each individual landlord, the tenancy agreement, the property, the lease terms, the neighbours, all of these things. And this is why the housing market and the moving market is such a minefield. And everyone's looking for simplicity, and there are no simple answers. So, let me wrap that up. Those are the 5 facts for this Friday. Factor in inflation into your purchasing decision, okay? Including the positive effect of inflation on your mortgage payments and mortgage debt. But don't think that house values always go up, because that ain't true. They haven't gone up since 2007. Values. Prices have gone up since 2007. Values haven't. Short-term fixed rate mortgages are risky. Make certain you have calculated, really carefully calculated the exact risk you're taking on. What's the worst case scenario at the end of my fixed rate? And that is a question for your mortgage broker. And because the answer to that question depends entirely on your, it depends entirely on your personal situation. Oh God. Leaseholds, if they're under 100 years, don't forget the depreciation of the lease length. Everything is local, not national when you come to buying or selling, and renting versus buying is a hyper-personal question. On that happy note, thanks guys, see you in the next video, bye-bye.